Now, there were sirens there, an air raid siren, the first in days, but there was no air raid. I just wonder if that was just a little bit of theater for Joe Biden. But Joe Biden wasn't going to be the only one to get the spotlight. Rishi Sunak, the new prime minister of the UK, even though he's not faced an election yet, he was in Munich, and he's so excited. Here's the headline of this story. Munich conference, Rishi Sunak says UK to provide Ukraine with long-range weapons, calls for new NATO charter. Why would you need a long-range weapon to defend in Ukraine? Ukraine is a fair-sized country. I call it middle size. But a long-range weapon, does that mean you're going to attack Russia itself? You know Russia's got nuclear weapons, right? And is this about defending Ukraine's territorial integrity, or is this about going to war with Russia? Here's the Russian Foreign Ministry that put out a tweet saying, quoting President Putin, Vladimir Putin, who gave a speech. In fact, he's been giving a series of speeches this week. Putin said, "We know that the West has been involved in the Kiev regime's attempts to strike at our strategic air bases. The drones used for these purposes were fitted with the assistance of Western specialists. And now they want to inspect our defense facilities?" It's another way of saying that Russia is suspending its participation in arms treaties. But look at this story in the New York Post, quoting Vladimir Zelensky talking to a German paper. Let me read the headline. China backing Russia in Ukraine would mean World War III, Zelensky. And let me quote Zelensky himself. This is in English. If China allies with Russia, there will be a world war. There will be a world war. And I do think that China is aware of that, he said. All right, well, here's China's reaction. It is the U.S., not China, that has been pouring weapons into the battlefield in Ukraine. The U.S. is in no position to tell China what to do. China will never accept U.S. finger-pointing or coercion on China-Russia relations. What's interesting about that Chinese reaction is it was addressed to the United States, not to Vladimir Zelensky, because I think the Chinese have come to the analysis that Zelensky is not the decider here. Zelensky is the mascot. He's the actor. He literally was an actor and a comedian before becoming president. He's not the decider. The decider is the money man, who's poured in more than $100 billion into Ukraine, who's overseeing that money, who's managing that money. Whoever is the answer to that question is the answer to who's making the decisions for Ukraine. And I don't think it's Vladimir Zelensky. I think it may be Rishi Sunak and Joe Biden and what has been called the military-industrial complex. It may be Jan Stoltenberg. I think that Jan Stoltenberg of NATO and Rishi Sunak and Joe Biden have more say over what happens in Ukraine than Zelensky does. But look at this. Breaking. China's President Xi Jinping plans to visit Moscow for a summit with Russian President Vladimir Putin in the spring, seeking a more active role in shaping the outcome of the Ukraine war. That was after Zelensky's comment. You know, one of the most important things that happened during the Cold War was Richard Nixon breaking China away from the Soviet Union and trying to orient it towards the West. I don't know if you know that history. Richard Nixon was known famously as an anti-communist. He was very hard line on the thing. And yet he sent Henry Kissinger secretly to do shuttle diplomacy back and forth to China to convince China to break with the Soviet Union and aim that country towards the West. Because Nixon knew that if China and the Soviet Union got together, that would be an enormous military and economic force. I think that Joe Biden is sending those mighty countries back together financially, industrially, in terms of high tech. Russia has been selling its energy to China for a long time. But now Russia is importing from China automobiles, high-tech things like phones and computers. There is more Chinese money in Russian markets than ever before to fill the void left by the West's sanctions. And as you know, we sent our own reporter to Russia a few months ago. It doesn't feel like the Western sanctions are having a pinch in Russia, in part because Russia is so strong because of its energy wealth, but also in part because there are other forces in the world willing to fill that void. One question I have for you is, what's the end game here? What's the plan? What's the exit strategy? Well, in most wars, isn't the exit strategy to defeat the enemy? When the West got involved, when the Allies got involved in the Second World War, it wasn't to have a stalemate. It was a total unconditional victory over the Axis, total surrender, nothing given to them, no quarter given to them. In fact, to this day, there are American military bases in Japan, Italy, and Germany, the three Axis powers. To this day, America has a military base in all three of those countries. Total surrender. That's normally the plan in a war. In other cases, it's just to reduce a threat. What is the end game with Ukraine and Russia? If you listen to Vladimir Zelensky, he talks constantly about retaking Crimea, which has been annexed by Russia years ago, actually. And there's even talk about bringing the war to the Russian main country. As you saw there, Russia was referring to drone attacks within Russia. And there's been the attacks on that key bridge in Crimea, and of course the underwater attack on the Nord Stream pipeline. What is the end game? What's the plan? And is the plan of total victory even possible against Russia, which has a large conventional army, but more to the point, has more nuclear weapons than any other country in the world? And even if we think that perhaps they're rusted or not working, or that the operators are drunk, or that even 90% of Russian nuclear weapons don't work or would fail in some way, well, that's still dozens of nuclear weapons that could, God forbid, explode in the West. What is the plan that Rishi Sunak has for his long-range weapons? What is the plan that Zelensky or whoever is backing him has for World War III? And what will they do if China and Russia simply don't follow along? Look at the jubilation at the Munich Security Council. Look at the advertisers, the sponsors. Look at the young women posing for the boss girl photos. They're very excited about this war, a war that will have women and children as the victims, but as men being the cannon fodder. I don't know what the answer is. I'm not a peacenik. I'm not pro-Russian. I'm not a leftist. I'm certainly not a communist. But what do you do when every person in the West apparently is hungry for war, either to make money or to act out some Cold War fantasy that never came true? What do you do when the West is running to war? Who would speak against it? I saw this video online this weekend. It's from a socialist named Claire Daly, a member of the European Parliament from Ireland. She's a socialist. I don't know if I have anything in common with her. I don't know if I trust her. I don't know much about her. But I listened to a couple of minutes of this speech and I thought, I can't disagree. Take a listen.
1 year on, as the war in Ukraine continues, when voices everywhere should be calling for a ceasefire and peace, this resolution is driving us in the opposite direction, so I proudly voted against it. It peddles the latest lie that this is not now about defending Ukraine, it's about Ukraine must win. What does that even mean? Last April, there was a deal on the table which would have seen Russia withdraw in return for Ukrainian non-NATO membership, but Ukraine's Western friends, killer clown Boris Johnson and NATO rocked into town and told them to keep fighting. The result? 6 cities devastated, 4 provinces illegally annexed, 108 billion euros in aid, which the people of Ukraine are going to have to pay back over decades, global food and energy crisis. Is this winning? Ordinary people don't win in wars. They're cannon fodder in the games of others. And ye can shout glory in here all you like, but there's no glory in the grave, and only graves come out of this folly. It's time for people and the silent majority all over Europe to take to the streets this weekend and demand peace and an end to the war.
Yeah, the problem with socialists like her is they don't have sponsors or advertisers willing to fly them to the Munich Security Conference now, do they? That was an excerpt from the Ezra Levant Show. I'm Ezra Levant. Every weekday, I do a monologue about the topic of the day. Then I interview a fascinating guest either in studio or via Skype. And then I read your mail, whether it's fan mail or hate mail, which is sometimes even more interesting. This is on our premium service, though, called Rebel News Plus. Go to rebelnewsplus.com. It's $8 a month or less if you buy a whole year in advance. You get my show every weeknight, plus Sheila Gunn Reid's show every week. It's called The Gun Show. It's pretty amazing. You know, we rely on you because we do not take a dime from the government. In Canada, that makes us almost unique. So please help us out and help yourself to some great journalism at rebelnewsplus.com.